Excel has a variety of tools to let you analyze data. The best tool to use when working with database type lists are the pivot table. We have a list of data here that shows information of various sales, the salesperson, the product, where in the region the product's being sold, the customers, etc. So we want to make sense out of this data, which covers a 2-year period between 2011 and 2012. So you would know the database tools like sorting and filtering subtotals, and these features are generally designed to rearrange the data and display it in different ways. We want some quick, good summary information out of this list. If you're thinking you want to see a list showing each salesperson and the amount of products each salesperson has sold, could this information be tabulated quickly by sorting using subtotals? Well, when we scroll to the right on the worksheet, we've done this manually. We're showing the salesperson in this list and how many items in the list and how many each person has sold. In total, there's about 8,000 items. So this isn't the easiest function to use. It's a very powerful tool. How long would it take to set up? Quite a long time. Even as an experienced Excel user, it will still take some time and you'll make mistakes along the way. So it's not easy to create. We'll narrow the column I so we can see this closer to our data and scroll left. So we may want to see a list like this as well as a list that shows a salesperson by region, or maybe even the customers and which products they're buying. How easy would it be to adjust this kind of list? Not very easy. Now with a pivot table, we could create a list like this in about 5 or 10 seconds even. Also, we wouldn't need to deal with formulas at all. As we do, we'll get the same answers, 7997 for our total. So we'll create a pivot table. The data you're working with is similar to the kinds of data you work with if you sort data or work with filtering or subtotal. Everything will work more smoothly and easier if the list that you begin with has no empty rows or columns. The idea that a pivot table can be thrown at anything isn't quite right. You have to have a structured list for a pivot table to be able to use it. Make sure your titles are in a single row. That makes things easier. In some cases, you may have empty cells, but that's fine. When you create a pivot table, the default location will be on a new worksheet, but you can also place it on the current worksheet. We'll go with the default. We'll create a pivot table. Even though this feature is designed to work with database and it combines some of the better features of sorting and filtering subtotals, it's not found on the Data tab. It's found on the Insert tab, the button on the left-hand side. The active cells within our list, the Create Pivot Table dialog box pops up. Excel has figured out the extent of the data down to row 913 here. The default location for the pivot table will be on a new worksheet. We won't change anything here. Quite often when you create a pivot table, you just want to make sure that Excel has picked up the data properly, and if you want it on a new sheet, just click OK. At the bottom of our screen we see the sheet names and we see a sheet 1. On this sheet on the left side we see a placeholder for the pivot table, and off to the right we see pivot table fields. You can move this list, drag it into the new worksheet environment. The upper portion here contains a list of all the field names we just saw. The bottom portion becomes increasingly important. It's like a map of the pivot table. So if we click the box for salesperson, we'll see salesperson on the left hand side of our table. We now see that over in column A, a list of our salesperson in alphabetical order. In the lower portion's pivot table fields dialog box, we do see salesperson listed. We might want to show the dollar value or the number of items sold. We'll click number of items. As it's a numeric field, when we check this box, it'll automatically appear as the value zone. In the pivot table being built to the left, we see the sum of the items, 7997, as we saw previously. The third step is different than the other two, as we want the word product to appear across the top. So we drag this into an area called columns, and the pivot table is there. This is the exact list as before. There are no formulas, and if we return to the original data, the manually created table to the right contains the same information we just saw in the pivot table. We'll see the exact same numbers in sheet 1 where the pivot table is. So the pivot table is easy to create, gives us the information we need. You could maybe display this in a presentation, maybe change some terms, Now the active cell is currently within the pivot table. You can see here there is a pivot table tools ribbon with the Analyze tab and the Design tab on it. And we also have a pivot table fields list on the right. If you click outside the pivot table field list disappears. Then the ribbon resumes its normal look and we don't see the special tabs. Click back within the pivot table and you see them. If you're making a presentation, you may want to remove the terms, column labels and row labels. But if you're working on your own, then maybe leave them there for a while. This way you get familiar with the terminology. This term matches up with the pivot table field list on the right. The columns area refers to the data across the top of the pivot table, and the row labels refer to the area on the left hand side. So we see these 4 sections over here, 3 of which we're using. The numerical entry referred to as the value zone, and we see that there. So we get used to using this portion of the pivot table field list as a mapping of your actual pivot table. If you don't want to see the terms, column labels and row labels, you can go to the Analyze tab, Pivot Table Tools ribbon, and to the right, Don't Show Field Headers, or leave these here and then go to the Design tab and choose Report Layout. The terms don't really give a good idea of what they mean, but we are currently using a compact form. If you use Outline or Tabular, then we're going to see the field names instead of the terms, row labels and column labels. So pivot tables are a great tool for analysing data, and you can create this in just a few steps.